Ever wonder what goes down at Kim Jong Un's secret parties? We're talking million-dollar booze, lavish banquets, and young girls forced into slavery. Yeah, you heard that right. North Korea's elite live it up while the rest of the country starves. But here's the real shocker. These parties ain't just for fun. They're part of a dark system designed to keep Kim in power. We're going to expose the truth behind the pleasure squad. The girls as young as 13 picked right out of school to entertain North Korea's leaders. It's way worse than you could imagine. Inside Kim's billion-dollar parties, Kim Jong Un's parties are on another level. We're talking billion-dollar blowouts that'd make even the richest celebs blush. Picture this, a palace decked out in gold and crystal with chandeliers so big they'd crush a car. The floors are polished marble and there's priceless art on every wall. It's like stepping into a Bond villain's lair, but way more extra. But here's the crazy part. While Kim's living it up like a rap star, most North Koreans are struggling to eat. The average person there makes less than $2,000 a year. That's less than what Kim spends on a single bottle of cognac at these parties. It's a wild contrast. You've got people barely scraping by, and then there's Kim dropping millions on a single night of partying. Let's break down some of the insane stuff at these parties. We're talking $2,000 bottles of champagne flowing like water. Kim's favorite is apparently this super rare crystal that costs more than a car. And the food? It's flown in fresh from all over the world. We're talking bluefin tuna from Japan, truffles from Italy, and caviar that costs more per ounce than gold. But the craziest part might be the booze. Kim's obsessed with this cognac called Louis XIII. Each bottle costs over $30,000 and comes in a crystal decanter. Rumor has it he once dropped $200,000 on this stuff in a single night. That's more than most North Koreans will see in their lifetime. And it ain't just about the drinks. These parties have entertainment that'd make Vegas look boring. There's rumors of private concerts by K-pop stars, circus performers from Europe, and even tigers and bears for some crazy rich person zoo action. It's like Kim's trying to cram every luxury in the world into one night. Now you might be wondering who gets to attend these insane parties. It ain't your average Joes, that's for sure. We're talking the top brass of the North Korean military, high-ranking party officials, and sometimes even foreign diplomats. It's like a who's who of North Korea's elite. But here's where it gets real dark. Mixed in with all these powerful people are members of Kim's infamous pleasure squad. These are young women, some reports say girls as young as 13, who are forced to attend these parties and entertain the guests. It's a sick system that turns what should be a fun party into something much more sinister. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the dark side of these parties. Behind all the glitz and glamour, there's a whole system of exploitation and abuse that keeps Kim's party machine running. We're talking human trafficking, forced labor, and some seriously messed up stuff that goes down when the cameras are off. So next time you see photos of Kim living it up with champagne and caviar, remember, there's a whole lot of pain and suffering behind those fancy parties. It's a system designed to keep Kim and his cronies in power while the rest of the country suffers. And trust me, we're just getting started on exposing the real truth behind Kim's billion-dollar bashes. The Pleasure Squad, Kim's dark secret. Behind the glitz and glamour of Kim's bashes lurks a sinister system that preys on the most vulnerable. What if I told you some party guests aren't there by choice? The selection process for Kim's inner circle is more twisted than you could ever guess. Let's talk about the Pleasure Squad. It sounds like something out of a sleazy nightclub, but it's way darker than that. This is Kim's personal harem, a group of young women handpicked to entertain him and his top officials. And when I say young, I mean young. We're talking girls as young as 13 being forced into this sick system. Now you might be wondering how Kim gets away with this. Well, it's all done under the radar. The government sends out scouts to schools across North Korea looking for girls who fit their twisted criteria. They're not looking for volunteers. These girls are chosen whether they like it or not. And the selection process, it's brutal. First off, they're looking for girls under 5'6" inches tall. No scars or blemishes allowed. Kim wants his pleasure squad to look perfect. They even check for soft, feminine voices. But here's the kicker. Virginity is non-negotiable. Yeah, you heard that right. These creeps are specifically targeting young, innocent girls. But it gets worse. The scouts don't just look at physical appearance. They dig into these girls' family backgrounds too. If you've got a relative who's escaped North Korea, you're out. They want girls from families with a spotless political record. It's like they're breeding a perfect group of slaves. One defector, Mi Hyang, spilled the beans on what it's like to be chosen. She was just 15 when they picked her. They asked her all sorts of humiliating questions about her sexual history, then dropped the bomb. She'd be serving Kim Jong Il for the next decade of her life. Can you imagine being told that at 15? So what happens to these girls once they're picked? Well, that's where things get real dark. They're basically kidnapped from their families. Parents aren't told the truth. They're just fed some BS about their daughters working on important government projects. Meanwhile, these girls are being shipped off to become sex slaves for North Korea's elite. The psychological impact on these kids is massive. They're cut off from their families, thrown into a world of constant surveillance and servitude. And if they try to escape, let's just say the consequences are severe. These girls are trapped, plain and simple. And it doesn't end when they grow up. After about a decade of service, usually when they're between 22 and 25, the girls are retired. But that doesn't mean freedom. Nope, they're often married off to elite guards and kept under close watch. Why? To make sure they don't spill the beans about what really goes down in Kim's inner circle. The craziest part, some parents actually let their daughters go willingly. Not because they want to, but because life in North Korea is so tough that they see it as a way to make sure their kid doesn't starve. That's how messed up things are. Becoming part of the pleasure squad is seen as a step up. This whole system is shrouded in secrecy. Most of what we know comes from defectors who've managed to escape and tell their stories. The North Korean government denies it all, of course, but the evidence is pretty damning, and this is just the beginning of these girls' nightmare. Next up, the training process. Trust me, it's even more twisted than you're imagining, but we'll get to that later. For now, just remember, behind every glitzy photo of Kim partying it up, there's a dark world of exploitation and abuse. And it's time the world knew the truth. From classroom to captivity. Picture this. You're sitting in math class, dreaming about lunch, when suddenly soldiers burst through the door. In North Korea, this isn't the start of a fire drill. It's how girls as young as 13 get recruited for Kim's parties. The real shock? What happens next? For most North Korean schoolgirls, a typical day starts like any other. They wake up early, put on their uniforms and head to class. The schools are strict, with a heavy focus on propaganda and loyalty to the regime. But these girls still find moments to giggle with friends, stress about exams and daydream about their futures. But for some, that normal life can change in an instant. Without warning, military officials storm into classrooms, their eyes scanning the room like predators hunting prey. The once chattering room falls dead silent. You can practically hear hearts pounding as the officials move between desks, closely examining each girl. The confusion and fear are palpable. Some girls start shaking, others look like they might cry. Nobody knows what's happening or why these men are here. The teacher stands frozen, just as shocked as her students. It's like a scene from a nightmare, but it's all too real. These officials ain't just picking girls at random. They've got a specific checklist they're working from. First off, they're looking for girls under 5 or 6 inches tall. No scars or blemishes allowed. They want them looking perfect. They even check for soft, feminine voices. But the most messed up part, they're specifically targeting virgins. But it ain't just about looks. These creeps dig deep into the girls' family backgrounds too. Got a relative who escaped North Korea? You're out. They want girls from families with spotless political records. It's like they're breeding a perfect group of slaves for Kim and his cronies. As the officials move through the room, the tension builds. Who will they choose? What will happen to them? The girls hold their breath, praying they won't be picked. But for a few unlucky ones, their worst fears come true. Mi Hyang, a defector who escaped North Korea, shared her experience of being taken at 15. She said soldiers just walked in and demanded she come with them. No explanation, no time to say goodbye. One minute she's worrying about homework, the next she's being dragged away to a life of servitude. The chosen girls are pulled from their desks and led out of the classroom. Their classmates watch in horror, knowing they might never see their friends again. The girls themselves are in shock, unable to process what's happening. They don't get to pack their things or hug their parents goodbye. It's a complete upheaval of their lives in a matter of minutes. What's even more twisted is that the families of these girls are kept in the dark. They're fed some BS about their daughters working on important government projects. Meanwhile, these kids are being shipped off to Pyongyang to become part of Kim's twisted party scene. As the girls are loaded into vehicles and driven away from everything they've ever known, the reality of their situation starts to sink in. They're no longer students with dreams and futures. They're now property of the state, destined for a life they never chose and can't escape. And this is just the beginning of their nightmare. The journey to Pyongyang is only the first step in a long, dark road. What awaits them in the capital? A training process so messed up it'll make your skin crawl. But we'll get to that soon enough. For now, just imagine being one of those girls, torn from your life in an instant, with no idea of the horrors that lie ahead. The grueling training process. You might think being kidnapped from your classroom was the worst part, but for these girls, arriving in Pyongyang is when the real nightmare begins. The training they're about to endure is so intense, it'd make military boot camp look like summer camp, and the skills they're forced to learn, let's just say they ain't exactly preparing for college. When these girls first arrive in Pyongyang, they're probably scared and confused, but that fear quickly turns to horror as they realize what's in store for them. The first thing that happens, a series of invasive medical exams that'd make your skin crawl. We're talking full-body checks, virginity tests, the works. It's like they're being treated as products, not people. But that's just the start. Once they pass these purity tests, the real training begins. And it ain't pretty. These girls are split into different groups based on their specialties. Some are trained in massage, others in singing and dancing. But don't think this is some fun talent show. Nah, this is all about pleasing Kim and his cronies. The massage training is especially intense. Some girls are even sent to places like Hong Kong to learn advanced techniques. Can you imagine being shipped off to a foreign country, forced to learn how to give massages to old creeps? It's messed up on so many levels. For the singers and dancers, it's no better. They're pushed to their limits, forced to practice for hours on end. And the songs and dances they're learning, let's just say they ain't family friendly. It's all about entertaining Kim and his buddies at those billion-dollar parties we talked about earlier. But here's the real kicker. This training lasts for a whole year. That's 365 days of being treated like property, of having your entire life controlled by the state. And during this time, these girls can't even talk to their families. They're told they're working on some important government project. But in reality, they're being groomed for a life of servitude. The psychological toll of all this is massive. These girls are being manipulated, brainwashed into thinking they're doing something important for their country. But in reality, they're being turned into playthings for North Korea's elite. It's enough to break even the strongest spirit. And the worst part, for most of these girls, there's no way out. After their training, they're expected to serve Kim and his buddies for about a decade. Then they're retired, usually married off to some elite guard and kept under close watch for the rest of their lives. It's a life sentence, handed down to girls as young as 13. Some defectors have managed to escape and share their stories. Mi Hyang, who we mentioned earlier, talked about how she was told she'd be serving Kim Jong Un for the next 10 years of her life. Can you imagine being told that at 15? It's like your whole future is stolen from you in an instant. This whole system is designed to keep Kim in power, to give him and his buddies whatever they want, whenever they want it. And these girls, they're just collateral damage in Kim's twisted world. It's a reminder that behind all the glitz and glamour of those billion-dollar parties, there's a whole lot of pain and suffering. And it's high time the world knew the truth about what really goes on in Kim's secret world. Rules of the pleasure squad. But the truth about Kim's secret world, it's even darker than you think. These girls aren't just trapped in a life of servitude, they're walking on eggshells every single day. One wrong move and it's game over, not just for them, but for their entire family. What could be so important that it's worth killing for? Turns out the pleasure squad's got a rule book thicker than the Bible, and breaking even one tiny rule can get you killed. We're talking about a set of rules so strict it'd make a prison look like a playground. These girls are living under constant surveillance, their every move watched and judged. It's like Big Brother, but with way higher stakes. Let's break down some of these crazy rules. First off, absolute secrecy is a must. These girls can't breathe a word about what goes on in Kim's inner circle. Not to their families, not to each other, not to anyone. It's like they're living in a real-life spy movie, except there's no cool gadgets or happy endings. Then there's the appearance rules. These girls gotta look perfect 24/7. We're talking strict diets, mandatory exercise, and a beauty regimen that'd make a Hollywood star cry. Any slip-up in their appearance could mean serious consequences. Imagine living in fear of gaining a pound or getting a pimple. But it gets even weirder. There are rules about how they walk, how they talk, even how they laugh. Everything's gotta be just right for Kim and his buddies. These girls are basically living dolls, trained to act exactly how the elite want them to, and don't even think about having a personal life. Relationships are strictly forbidden. These girls can't date, can't have friends outside the squad, can't even talk to men unless they're ordered to. It's total isolation designed to keep them dependent on the system. Now, you might be wondering why anyone would follow such insane rules. Well, the consequences of breaking them are downright terrifying. We're talking about serious punishment, not just for the girls, but for their entire families. Yeonmi Park, a North Korean defector, spilled the beans on how deep this goes. The government does a full background check on these girls, making sure they don't have any relatives who've escaped North Korea or have ties to South Korea. Why? So they've got leverage over them. But the most chilling rule of all? The pledge of secrecy. Break that, and you're not just risking your own life, you're putting your whole family in danger. Defectors report that any girl found to have broken this pledge faces execution, and her family members aren't safe either. It's a brutal way to keep everyone in line. This whole system is built on fear and control. The psychological manipulation is off the charts. These girls are constantly watched, always afraid of messing up. It's like living with a gun to your head 24/7. No wonder so few manage to escape or speak out. And here's the kicker. All this is just the rule book. The day-to-day reality for these girls is even more messed up. But we'll get to that next. For now, just imagine living every moment knowing that one wrong move could cost you everything. That's the reality for Kim's Pleasure Squad. It's a twisted world where luxury and terror go hand in hand, and the price of a single mistake is higher than you could ever imagine. A day in the life of Kim's entertainers. Ever wondered what it's like to be a teenager in North Korea's most secretive circle? Forget TikTok and homework. These girls have a schedule that'll shock you. From dawn to dusk, their lives are a bizarre mix of luxury and horror. Let's peek behind the curtain of a day in Kim's twisted paradise. The day starts early for Kim's entertainers. While most teens are hitting snooze on their alarms, these girls are already up, primping and preening, but it ain't for school pictures or first dates. Nah, they're getting dolled up for a day of entertaining North Korea's elite. And trust me, it's way worse than it sounds. First up, a round of intense exercise. Gotta keep those figures perfect, right? But this ain't your regular gym class. These girls are under constant scrutiny, their bodies treated like products that need to meet Kim's exacting standards. 1 extra pound could mean serious trouble. After working up a sweat, it's time for beauty treatments. We're talking high-end skincare, professional makeup, the works. But don't think this is some fun girls' day out. Every move is watched, every brushstroke scrutinized. These girls ain't doing this for themselves. They're being molded into Kim's ideal of beauty. Then comes the really messed up part, their duties for the day. While normal teens are stressing about pop quizzes, these girls are preparing to entertain Kim and his cronies. That could mean anything from singing and dancing to giving massages or just looking pretty at parties. And yeah, it gets way darker than that. The worst part, they've got zero privacy. Every move is watched, every conversation monitored. Imagine living in a world where you can't even have a private thought. It's like being trapped in a gilded cage, surrounded by luxury but stripped of all freedom. And the emotional toll? It's massive. These girls are forced to act happy and eager to please no matter how they really feel. They can't show fear, sadness, or anger. It's like they're living dolls, programmed to smile and nod no matter what's happening to them. When it comes to interacting with Kim and his buddies, things get real twisted. These girls are expected to laugh at every joke, agree with every opinion, and basically worship the ground these guys walk on. And if they slip up, the consequences are severe. One defector spilled the beans on just how degrading these entertainment duties can get. We're talking humiliating games, forced drinking, and way worse stuff that we can't even talk about here. It's a nightmare dressed up in designer clothes and fancy makeup. But the party's gotta end sometime, right? Wrong. Even when they're not actively entertaining, these girls are still on call 24/7. They could be woken up in the middle of the night and ordered to perform or serve in some way. There's no such thing as off-duty in Kim's world. The long-term effects of this lifestyle are brutal. We're talking severe psychological trauma, trust issues, the works. Many of these girls struggle to adjust to normal life even if they manage to escape. It's like they've been living in a twisted alternate reality for years. So next time you see photos of Kim living it up with a bunch of pretty girls around him, remember, those smiles are fake. Behind the glitz and glamour is a world of pain and exploitation. It's a daily life that'd break most people, and these girls are living it day in, day out. And the worst part, for most of them, there's no end in sight. The dark side of Kim's parties. Ever wonder what happens when Kim Jong Un decides it's party time? Forget everything you think you know about wild nights. These aren't just parties. They're a whole other level of messed up. And what goes down behind those closed doors? Let's just say it ain't for the faint of heart. Picture this. A luxurious palace decked out in gold and crystal. The air's thick with cigar smoke and expensive perfume. About 40 of North Korea's elite are scattered around, sipping on cognac that costs more than most people make in a year. But mixed in with the powerful men are young women from the Pleasure Squad, their faces fixed in forced smiles. As the night wears on, things start to get real weird. The booze keeps flowing and people get louder, more reckless. That's when the games start. And trust me, these ain't your typical party games. We're talking stuff that make even the wildest frat parties look tame. One defector spilled the beans on a favorite game of Kim's. It's called the hair shaving game. Sounds innocent enough, right? Wrong. Losers gotta strip down naked. And if someone's too drunk, they get their head shaved. It's like a twisted version of Truth or Dare where everyone loses. But it gets worse. As the night goes on, these games turn into full-on orgies. One defector said that when Kim's in a good mood, he'll kick off events specifically for sex. We're talking parties that last until 3 in the morning, fueled by booze and Kim's sick fantasies. And the pleasure squad girls? They ain't got a choice but to play along. These young women, some as young as 13, are forced to participate in all kinds of degrading acts. It's like a scene from some messed up movie, but it's all too real for these girls. The whole thing's got this surreal vibe to it. You've got some of the most powerful people in North Korea acting like animals, while these young girls are trapped in a nightmare they can't escape. The line between entertainment and exploitation? It doesn't exist in Kim's world. When the sun comes up and the party's over, things don't get better for the pleasure squad. They're left to deal with the trauma of what just happened, knowing they'll have to do it all again soon. And they can't talk to anyone about it, not even each other. The punishment for spilling secrets about these parties, it ain't pretty. These parties ain't just about having fun for Kim and his buddies. Nah, they're a way to keep everyone in line. By involving his top officials in these messed up activities, Kim's got dirt on all of them. It's like a twisted insurance policy. Who's going to speak out against the regime when they've got skeletons like this in their closet? The stories that have come out from defectors are wild, but they're probably just scratching the surface. Most of what goes on at these parties is still shrouded in secrecy. But one thing's for sure, the aftermath of these events leaves scars that don't heal. So next time you see Kim Jong Un grinning in some fancy photo op, remember what's really going on behind the scenes. Those billion-dollar parties ain't just extravagant, they're a cover for some of the darkest, most twisted stuff you can imagine. And for the girls of the pleasure squad, the party never really ends. It just turns into a lifetime of trauma and silence. The true cost of Kim's luxury. You think those parties are bad? Wait till you hear about the rest of Kim's spending. This guy's living like he's got money to burn, but here's the thing. North Korea's broke. So where's all this cash coming from? And what's it costing the average North Korean? Let's break it down. While most of his people are struggling to put food on the table, Kim's out here dropping millions on booze and smokes. We're talking about £2,675,000 just on fancy spirits and liquor, mostly shipped in from China. That's enough to feed thousands of families for a year. But nah, Kim needs his top-shelf drinks, and it ain't just alcohol. North Korea's also importing £12.6 million worth of tobacco products. We're talking cigars, cigarettes, and fancy cigarillos. All this while the average North Korean is lucky to afford basic necessities. It's like Kim's living on a whole different planet from his people. And now you might be wondering how Kim's getting all this luxury stuff when North Korea's supposed to be under crazy strict international sanctions. Well, turns out China's been Kim's hookup. Trade records show that North Korea's been leaning hard on China to keep the party going. Luxury imports are through the roof, while essential goods for the regular folks, they're scarce as hen's teeth. But it ain't just about the booze and smokes. Kim's got a sweet tooth that's costing his country big time. Reports show he's splurging on imported chocolate while skimping on basic food and hygiene products for his people. It's like he's living in some twisted Willy Wonka fantasy while the rest of the country's stuck in a nightmare. The craziest part? This ain't just Kim being selfish. It's a whole system designed to keep him and his cronies in power. By living this ultra-luxe lifestyle, Kim's showing off his power to the elites who keep him on top. Meanwhile, the regular folks are too busy trying to survive to even think about rebelling. And let's be real, the numbers we're talking about here are probably just the tip of the iceberg. Most of Kim's spending is kept under wraps, so we can only imagine how much he's really blowing through. But even with what we know, it's clear that Kim's living large while his country suffers. The contrast between Kim's lifestyle and the average North Koreans is mind-blowing. While he's sipping on $1,000 cognac, most of his people are struggling to find clean water. While he's puffing on imported cigars, kids are going to bed hungry. It's not just unfair, it's straight up cruel. And the international community? They know what's going on. Those sanctions we mentioned earlier, they're supposed to stop this kind of thing, but as long as Kim's got friends like China willing to look the other way, he'll keep living it up while his people suffer. So next time you see Kim Jong Un smiling for the cameras, remember, that grin is bought and paid for with the suffering of millions. Every bottle of champagne, every fancy cigar, every chocolate bar he enjoys is a slap in the face to the North Korean people. It's a system so messed up, it's hard to even wrap your head around it. But one thing's for sure, as long as Kim's in power, the party ain't stopping anytime soon. The brutal selection process. While Kim's living it up, there's a whole other side to these parties that'll make your stomach turn. Imagine being chosen for a government project, only to find out you're now part of Kim's personal entertainment. That's the reality for some young North Korean women, and the selection process, it's beyond messed up. Picture this, you're a teenager in North Korea, just trying to get through another day at school. Suddenly soldiers barge into your classroom. They ain't there for a friendly visit, they're scouting for Kim's next batch of entertainers. These guys ain't looking for volunteers. Nah, they're picking girls whether they like it or not. The selection process is so invasive, it'll make your skin crawl. These soldiers don't just look at your face, they examine every inch of you like you're cattle at auction. They're checking for any scars or blemishes, making sure you fit their twisted idea of perfect. And if you're over 5'6", tough luck, you're out. But it ain't just about looks, these creeps dig deep into your family history too. Got a relative who escaped North Korea? You're done. They want girls from families with spotless political records. It's like they're breeding a perfect group of slaves for Kim and his buddies. And the questions they ask, they're beyond humiliating. One defector, Mi Hyang, spilled the beans on what it's like. She was just 15 when they picked her, bombarding her with all sorts of messed up questions about her sexual history. Can you imagine being put through that at 15? The worst part, your family's kept totally in the dark. Parents are fed some bull about their daughters working on important government projects. Meanwhile, these girls are being shipped off to become part of Kim's twisted party scene. Some parents even let their daughters go willingly, thinking it's a way to make sure their kid doesn't starve. That's how messed up things are in North Korea. Becoming part of the pleasure squad is seen as a step up. As the selection process goes on, the tension builds. Who's going to make the cut? What happens to the girls who are chosen? The fear and uncertainty are off the charts. These girls know that if they're picked, their lives are about to change forever, and not in a good way. The final stages of recruitment are shrouded in secrecy, but from what defectors have shared, it's a nightmare. Girls are subjected to annual physical inspections to make sure they stay virgins and disease-free. It's like they're treated as products, not people. So how do these soldiers actually pick the lucky girls for Kim's parties? It's a twisted combination of physical appearance, family background, and pure chance. They're looking for girls who are young, pretty, and from politically reliable families. If you tick all those boxes, congrats. You've just won the worst lottery ever. The psychological impact on these girls is massive. One minute they're normal teenagers, the next they're being told they'll be serving Kim Jong Un for the next decade of their lives. It's enough to break even the strongest spirit, and this is just the beginning of their nightmare. What comes next for these girls? A training process so messed up it'll make your head spin. But that's a whole other story. For now, just remember, behind every glitzy photo of Kim partying it up, there's a dark world of exploitation and abuse. And it all starts with this brutal selection process, turning innocent schoolgirls into pawns in Kim's twisted game. Life after the pleasure squad. Imagine spending years in Kim's secret parties, then one day it's all over. You're free, right? Wrong. The life of an ex-pleasure squad member is so messed up it makes their time in service look like a walk in the park. Here's why. When these girls retire from the pleasure squad, usually between 22 and 25, you'd think they'd finally get to live normal lives. But nah, that ain't how it works in Kim's twisted world. These women might be out of the squad, but they're far from free. First off, the surveillance is insane. These ex-members are watched like hawks 24/7. Why? Because Kim and his cronies are paranoid about them spilling the beans on what really goes down at those billion-dollar parties. It's like they've traded one prison for another, except now they're trapped in their own homes. And don't even think about trying to live a normal life. These women are basically walking secrets, and the government ain't taking any chances. They're often married off to elite guards or other high-ranking officials. It's not about love or starting a family. It's about keeping them under control and making sure they stay silent. But here's where it gets real messed up. Some of these women are actually given cash and gifts when they retire. We're talking about $4,000 in money and presents. Sounds nice, right? Wrong. That's almost twice what the average North Korean family makes in a year. It ain't a reward. It's hush money, plain and simple. Trying to fit back into society after years in the pleasure squad, good luck with that. These women face crazy stigma and suspicion. Everyone knows they were part of Kim's inner circle, but nobody knows exactly what went down. It's like they're walking around with a big fat target on their backs. And the emotional scars, they run deep. Mi Hyang, who managed to escape after 2 years in the squad, spilled the beans on how messed up it all is. She talked about the intense shame and psychological toll of being selected and serving in the pleasure squad. It's not something you just get over. It haunts these women for life. The worst part is most of these ex-members are stuck. They can't talk about what happened to them, can't seek help, can't even trust their own families. It's like they're living in a permanent state of fear and isolation. Every day is a struggle to keep the past buried while trying to build some kind of future. But here's a tiny glimmer of hope in all this darkness. A few brave souls have managed to escape and tell their stories. These defectors are risking everything to shed light on the dark realities of life in the pleasure squad. They're the ones giving us a peek behind the curtain of Kim's twisted world. So next time you see Kim Jong Un living it up with his fancy parties and pretty girls, remember, there's a whole lot of pain behind those smiles. For the women who make it out of the pleasure squad, retirement ain't the end of their nightmare. It's just the beginning of a whole new kind of hell. And for most of them, there's no real escape. Just a lifetime of secrets, shame and silence. The true size of Kim's harem, those girls trapped in Kim's twisted world, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The real numbers behind his so-called pleasure squad are so shocking they'll make your head spin. Just how deep does this rabbit hole go? Let's talk numbers. Trying to pin down exactly how many girls are in Kim's harem is like trying to count grains of sand in a sandstorm. The estimates are all over the place, and for good reason. North Korea ain't exactly known for its transparency. Some reports say there are hundreds of girls in the pleasure squad. Others claim it's more like a few dozen. The truth? It's probably somewhere in between, but here's the kicker. We're talking about a constantly rotating group. Girls are brought in, retired, and replaced on the regular. Getting accurate numbers is a nightmare. North Korea keeps this stuff under tight wraps, and most of what we know comes from defectors who've managed to escape. It's like trying to piece together a puzzle when you've only got a handful of pieces. But here's what we do know. Each year, Kim Jong Un reportedly handpicks about 25 virgin girls to join the pleasure squad. That's 25 lives ruined, 25 families torn apart, all to satisfy Kim's twisted desires. And that's just the new recruits. We're not even talking about the girls already in the system. Now you might be thinking, 25 girls a year doesn't sound like that many. But hold up. Remember, these girls usually serve for about a decade, so we're looking at potentially hundreds of girls trapped in this system at any given time. It's like a never-ending cycle of exploitation. The pleasure squad ain't just one big group either. It's organized into different sections, each with its own sick purpose. You've got girls trained in massage, others in singing and dancing, and some, well, let's just say their duties are even more disturbing. All this operates under something called Section 5. It's the part of the North Korean government that handles Kim's private life, including his entertainment. Yeah, they've got a whole department dedicated to keeping this twisted system running. But here's the real shocker. The pleasure squad might be even bigger than we think. Some experts believe there could be upwards of 2,000 women trapped in this system. That's not just a harem. That's a small army of exploited women. And get this, the origins of the pleasure squad go way back. Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un's daddy, started this whole mess. He believed getting it on with young women would make him immortal. Seriously, you can't make this stuff up. Kim Jong-un just took his dad's sick idea and ran with it. So what's the real number? How many girls are actually in Kim's pleasure squad? The truth is, we might never know the exact count. But whether it's hundreds or thousands, one thing's for sure, it's way too many. Each of these girls represents a life destroyed, a future stolen. And the impact on North Korean society? It's like a poison spreading through the whole country. Families live in fear that their daughters might be chosen. Young girls grow up knowing they could be snatched away at any moment. It's a system that turns women into commodities and tears the very fabric of society apart.